This is Aron van Ammers, CTO and Founding Partner of Outlier Ventures. And today we'll be speaking about GPT-3, the big, bold, and powerful new AI by OpenAI, and some of the implications that it has for, well, everything, and especially trust in everything, and how Web3 can play a role in that, or how it can play a role for Web3. As written in the chat, very happy if during or after the short presentation you have questions, to invite you on screen so we can have a bit of a face-to-face discussion. But if not, also fine, and I'll have to answer questions as you post them in the chat and the ask a question functionality. Without further ado, I will start sharing a presentation. Here we go. Can everybody see the slides all right? Are they large enough to see? Excellent. Right. Well, disclaimer, I might or might not mention projects or otherwise assets that Outlier is invested in, and none of this is investment advice. So GPT-3, what is it? You've probably seen it. It's a machine learning based language model by a company called OpenAI, partially for-profit AI firm. OpenAI started originally as a not-for-profit operation with sort of the goal to develop safe AI and keep AI sort of under control. Now Elon Musk has actually left, and it's a bit different, but still. Exactly, Ryan. This is the one where I am actually in AI. I'm actually a deepfake right now. I'm in the metaverse. So it's not new software, or there's some new aspects, but it's ultimately a bigger version, especially an updated version of the previous sort of state-of-the-art model from OpenAI called, inspiringly, GPT-2, generative pre-trained transformer. There's unsupervised learning, so there's not a whole bunches of people labeling data sets. It's just to feed a lot of language into the model, and magic comes out. So the primary feature is natural language generation, so text. We've seen examples already of non-text or, well, code type language, but still, it's text, it's language. It's not used to generate images. It's not used to generate videos, or especially not big calculations. It's used to generate language or transform one type of language into another, those type of things. It's features some form of language comprehension. Whether it actually comprehends is, up to in the eye of the beholder, where you think it comprehends, but you can see that it picks up clues out of what's being said that at least suggests that there's something more to it than just a simple transformation of one set of words into another. Why is it important? Well, just to give you a sense of the scale. This is the amount of parameters in language models, so comparable efforts. This is a non-logarithmic scale, and as you can see, it's way out there. It's 10 times bigger than the previously biggest model by Microsoft, which was already humongous. So they've really done something on an entirely different scale here, especially in the amount of parameters, the amount of data, the size of the model. It's huge. Now then, Web3, the other thing I mentioned. What is Web3? Well, we're working on the definition. You see, we have the founders of Web3 podcast by Jamie Burke and Outlier Ventures, where we further explore that question. But ultimately, some core properties of what we see at Web3 is a movement from centralized to decentralized, from platform lock-in to more open systems, where user sovereignty is important, where data privacy, data ownership is important, where cryptography and cryptographic functions play an important role in both, securing data and making data traceable, etc. And yeah, where you see crypto networks, sometimes called blockchains, sometimes they are blockchains, and sometimes there are different types of crypto networks play an important role to get people together. And yeah, different people have different scopes of Web3, but it's these are some of the core properties that we see to it. But just to give a quick taste, you've probably seen some of the demos, but what are we talking about with GPT-3? It can generate SQL queries. Well, if you've ever interacted with a database, and now you can just say, what is the average number of X? And it will output the actually syntactically correct and usable query. That's a pretty big thing, especially because there hasn't been specific training towards that. It's just looked at a whole bunch of data, and you prime it with a few questions. This comes out. Jargon to readable text, and including other examples where that readable text can be adapted to comprehension levels. So jargon, I don't know what dyspnea, cough I know, but obstructive disease given medication, which receptor is medication most likely to work on, no idea. But I can understand the patient is suffering from asthma. And this, again, without any specific training, that's new. That's definitely the groundbreaking aspect of it. Seeing this type of thing where you can either go from a bunch of text to a quick summary, or from your quick summary to a bunch of text written in your style. So you train it with a few emails written by you, and you give then for your new email a few cues. Thanks, no, our minimum is X, and out comes a text that's could plausibly be written by you. That's definitely impressive. And then these type of applications, like this one's called Learn from Anyone. There's a few others where you say, well, I want to learn relativity, and I want to speak to Einstein about it. Well, of course, there is no Einstein in the box, but you can get a conversation with an entity that seems pretty similar to Einstein, and in this case, an entity that seems pretty similar to Dale Carnegie, and have a real conversation where they speak about their ideas. And yeah, that's definitely a new thing. There's this, I am not in the circle of Intimi who actually have an OpenAI access key to the API, because they've curated that and limited it to a handful, well, not a handful, but a small group of curated individuals. But there is a way to directly interface with GPT-3, and that's through a game called AI Dungeon, where if you get the premium version, you actually get GPT-3. This was my attempt to finally have it produce some JavaScript code, and it did work, but albeit because in AI Dungeon it is a game, it's not directly interacting with the GPT-3 API. It's interacting with a game that also uses GPT-3. But I could fire this up later in the session if anyone's interested. You can actually try to get some answers in that form and get an idea of what it looks like. Some of the limitations, because with all this magic, it's pretty easy to sort of jump into this thing can do everything. It can write code. That means it can write all code. It can write stories. That means it can write books. Well, not really, because the context window or the amount of actual output text that it can generate is very limited at this point. It's 500 to 1,000 words. So, and that translates to the different domains that you've seen, like that we've seen code generation also, where people say, well, I want an app that's when I add a to-do, it adds it, and then I can take items off the list, and yada, out comes an actual app that does that. But that's about, the level of sophistication that you're going to get out of it, because a more sophisticated app would require a lot more code than this size of 1,000 words equal. And apparently it turns towards repetition pretty quickly as if you go to larger, longer stretches of interaction with it. That's something to be solved by people who actually directly work with it, but it's definitely a limitation, and something that's common in these kind of language generating models. And then there's the other part, like from the huge increase in size and further optimizations, you would expect that on character level tasks, such as do words rhyme, or are they similar, can it do some arithmetic that you would expect a leap of improvement as well? And there isn't such a leap. So it's marginally improved over the previous model, but not that much. And ultimately, it's does worse than most other, on many specific tasks. It does worse than pre-existing models that were fine-tuned for those tasks. But that's the important part here. Like it's generic, and you can teach it almost anything, lots of different domains, but it will probably not do nearly as good as a pre-existing domain. So for example, that radiology, or what was it, the bit of medical text about asthma, there might have been systems that already did better on that question, but not with just 3 cues on bit of jargon, bit of understandable text, and then go for it. So it's the generic aspect and the sort of not training, but priming with very minimal input. That's really the big thing here, big innovation. Now, few potential use cases that you could see applied to Web3, which I don't think are too interesting. I mean, as we can generate code, of course, you can think of generate smart contracts then, or the other way around. If I have a smart contract, I could get a peek on what that actually is. Maybe it can describe that for me. Natural language interfaces to on-chain data, and a bit further down the line, things like art DAOs, because if GPT-3 can generate prose, it can generate poetry, it can generate stories. You could say, well, that's actually art. Could it, start to sell those things, and could you have something around that? But it's a bit more weavy future thinking. But the middle one, I think, might be an actually more interesting one, more applied to GPT-3, because as it can, generate so much, and some of it will be garbage, and others will not. Other things will not. Curation of what comes out is a really important task. And what you see happen now with those early users of the API and building applications, they effectively perform that curation. So OpenAI curates who is allowed to use it, and then who is allowed to use it curates what comes out. But you could do that in a more open manner, as we see in many blockchain-based systems, with things like token-curated registries and others. Voting where you think something's valuable. That could theoretically be applied very well with to what comes out of a GPT-3 based service. But as compared to Web3, where everything is open and verifiable, etc., it is a closed and proprietary system. It's a closed and proprietary data set. It's in that sense not different from what was already there. There already were, many cloud-based or otherwise SaaS-based AI services that you could use. If you want to get image recognition, you could get it from a whole bunch of players, and natural language generation also, just not this good. But it's not in any way more open than those. In fact, at this point, it's more closed because it's not publicly available. So there's that. Now, one thing to wonder about, and that's been going around in as people have discussed this, is like, what is the role of humans when GPT-3 can do all this? Well, firstly, it's important to realize what I said, like it's not perfect, it's quite limited, etc. But then assuming a very well functioning GPT-3 or its successors, what do humans still do, and why are they important? Well, asking the right questions, because it's not trivial to get those results that you've seen that are impressive, and especially it's not trivial to get results that are actually useful, not just an interesting and bit of what looks like magic. Okay, it's magic, but it's actually useful. So asking the right question and being able to work with this API is definitely a skill that at this point is still a human job. Correcting what comes out, and the curation aspect, what I mentioned, like it's I'd say at this point at least still very much a human task to say, well, this bit that came out is valuable and good, and this bit not so good. And why is that? Well, don't know. It's the human is definitely more capable than the AI at this point. And the last one, as extended to code generation and generating user interfaces. That there was this other example of where you can say, I want a landing page that has a picture here and it has some lead text there, and then out comes your landing page, and it actually works. So the bits, the nitty-gritty bits of actually writing the code, writing the template, that's what this AI does. But if you look at a larger system, you very quickly you're going to run into those limitations of what GPT can produce. So the role of architecting that higher level system, which modules are there, which items are there, I'd say is still pretty much a human task, or becomes an instance of the first point here, where you would need to ask, oh hey, dear GPT, how should I, which abstraction should I use for my system? And then go into those abstractions. Well, what does this module look like? Generate some code, etc., etc. But this, in general, it's moving a bit, up the chain in terms of where human value add is. But ultimately, this is all nice, and it's also scary, because how can I trust what comes out? AI. Interpretability and sort of traceability where things come from was already a problem, a big challenge with any more recent powerful forms that we've seen of machine learning AI bias as well. Like if there's a bias, where does it come from? The more powerful these models get, the more present and pertinent that becomes. And in this case, it's pretty. As the potential application areas are so wide, that becomes ever more important. Because I'm going to ask this thing to write my emails. I'm going to ask this thing to summarize maybe emails that people send me. This thing's going to be used maybe to write news articles, etc. There might be errors. Why does it just do this bit of content over that bit? Really important questions. And also, how can I, as a user, as an end consumer or further user of that service, how can I know that it was even GPT-3 that told it to me? Because I might go to a website called learnfromanyone.com and say, well, it's ask for Einstein, and then it says it uses GPT-3 to replicate my Einstein and ask about relativity. But how do I know that there's not just a person at the end? So that's the other side of that. But ultimately, I think the most important question is, how can I trust that anything anymore has not been generated by GPT-3 or some variant of it, in the sense that if I read a piece written by Aron van Ammers, how do you know it was me that wrote that, or even part of that? If you go to the New York Times, how do you know that that journalist that they claim has actually written it? As you look at the code generation capabilities, which admittedly they were limited, but you can, let's say there is a future where AIs can generate lots of code. Maybe this isn't it, but maybe next version is going to be even more powerful. Who's responsible for that code and what it does? If you think of like a code commits to system, is it am I going to use my GPT-3 and then commit it and say it was me and then be responsible for it? Especially in Web3 and all these systems that handle value without middlemen or middle parties. That becomes a whole lot of trust that you instill in that system. Into that system, and if even that code is generated by something you really don't have so much visibility of or understanding of, that becomes quite scary. So with the reality that deepfakes are already quite powerful and will probably become more powerful. I'm sure you've seen this one with Obama saying funny things. Here's the thing: in this video, Obama was saying funny things. With GPT-3, you have a way to generate the text that actually sounds a whole lot more like Obama. So it's one step further into really realistic fake videos. Audio synthesization was also, is getting pretty close to actual voices that sound very, very close to people. And actually, as part of the OpenAI paper, they did a survey on like generated news stories. Could people distinguish that from real news stories? Well, they couldn't. It was just indistinguishable for people. So that's quite scary. And yeah, other aspects there or possibilities are like, as this can do, fiction writing or non-fiction writing. I mentioned news, and that there's of course any area of communication, message sending. Like, how, when I send you a WhatsApp message, how do I still know it's still you, right? If you can generate the text for all these messages with a really powerful way that's very, sounds very authentic, it erodes the trust that I know it's actually you, the human, or you, the organization, or whatever, who's there. So that's a concern. Some of the areas where I think Web3 and Web3 principles, technologies, tools can help. In the Web3 world, it's sort of, some of the core aspects are traceability and verifiability through cryptographic functions, through hashing of data, through hashing and inspectability of logic. So you can imagine, audit trails for content becoming ever more important. And yeah, the same for logic, as I explained. Like, how do I know that this was generated by a GPT-3 model, or not know it? Can I see some work? Do I have some way of inspecting the logic that was used to actually generate it? With the current closed service that it is, as with any closed AI service, I do not. Like, there are no other ways. Well, self-sovereign identity technologies and verifiable credentials, I think, are becoming ever more important. So personal credentials, but also something like proof of human. Like, there's initiatives and ways to get close to that point, but there isn't yet a fully mature way for you to say, well, there's a single human has done this. And that in a cryptographically verifiable way, or at least a digitally verifiable way. And there are some good initiatives in that direction, and I think those are becoming ever more important, because you could combine them with traceability of content, and then be able to say, okay, this video of Obama was actually, it comes with a seal of actually Barack Obama that I can inspect in some public system which has a lot of trust and cryptographic verifiability around it, to give me a lot more trust that video is actually him saying it, rather than something generated. And same for machines, well, both physical machines and more software-based machines. I want to know, and those kind of things would offer possibilities to give more trust in that, and maybe even inside of AI-based systems. And yeah, finally, the incentivized content creation. I'm quite interested to see what can be done there to do that in a different way than the current more closed approach that OpenAI has followed from the beginning. Just to give a bit more further depth of that concept of verifiability. To take the simple example of an Ethereum transaction, I want to send one Ether to somebody. I have many levels where I can look deeper on that, and maybe I'm satisfied with the first level. Maybe I'm satisfied to see on my screen, your one ETH has been sent, and this transaction ID. Okay, looks good to me. But if I want, I can go to network explorers, which are externally operated, still centrally controlled, but there's more of them. Maybe kind of some more trust. I can actually connect to blockchain nodes on the network. I can run my own node where I run the code. I can check the cryptographic hashing in these chains. On each level, you go a level deeper. If you have more understanding and capability to use those systems, you have the option to check those. All the way down to the actual external code, I can go to GitHub and inspect the code. And well, again, GitHub centralized a platform in itself, but the code is open, so I can look at the code and hopefully trust that GitHub doesn't show me something different. And with things like verifiable worlds, you can get more certainty that the code that you see is actually the code that runs, because those, again, are not automatically given. Now, if you compare that to a GPT-3 based service as it would be now, of course, I have the UX, I have the result. I can see, that when I input a text, out comes a SQL query. I can see that when I input the email, out comes a summary. And I can see that something like learnfromanyone.com or what they call the other services, AI channels, they say, well, we use GPT-3. Okay, well, that's it then. That's what I have to verify. And on OpenAI itself, if I have access, I could access the API and could verify maybe that I can see if it gives the same output. And that's about it, right? I can't dig deeper. I have to trust that there are actually 175 billion parameters and a 700 gigabytes model that's there that does something, but there's no way to dig deeper. So yeah, I think there's really a need and an opportunity for improvement there. And finally, some notes and thoughts like, okay, we have this, what's next? Surely this was not the last version of GPT. And of course, that chart at the very beginning, OpenAI was definitely not a game in town in language models. So there's going to be better, bigger versions of language generating models. Microsoft and Google and Facebook and the other big players are not going to sit still. And yeah, expect a wave of startups based on GPT-3. The happy people who've been given access to GPT-3 now, they're building little businesses. There was a few who were able even to fund their first stretch just because they got they posted the viral video and people got interested and they got funded. But as people actually start to understand how this can really be used, there's going to be in many places. And well, still, I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful. Are there any more Web3 based or open alternatives possible to this? Because what do you ultimately need to build something like this? You need a lot of data. Well, in fact, they haven't used any proprietary data. It's all open data that they trained on. You need a lot of compute and infrastructure to run all of that, and storage and networking. You obviously need funding. You need a lot of skilled people, and you need a collaboration structure to work together and to realize that, well, accidentally in the Web3 world, we have a lot of that. With DAOs and new governance systems, we have interesting collaboration structures. We have an awful lot of skilled people. Maybe not the AI crowd yet, but let's get them over here and see what open alternatives could be built.